Unmute myself. I think I did that right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Thank you for being here. Let me do what I was supposed to do, get us started here today. All right. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. And Jessica, welcome back. Esperanza. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for being here. I feel like I'm in Romper Room again. You're probably not old enough to remember Romper Room, but I was actually one of the child stars in Romper Room back in the 50s. So anyway, Linda knows about it already. I'm a clean slate here. So anyway, thank you all for being here today. We are at the Greater San Diego Association of Realtors. And my name is Kevin Burke. There is my telephone number and there is my email address. I'd really rather speak with you if you have a question or anything outside of this forum here. But if you have something I can help you with, I hope you'll please let me know. But if you can't get a hold of me by phone, then email is always a good option to at least set up a time, or if it's just a simple question you want to ask, then fine. I know that I owe Yolanda something from earlier this morning. Jessica, I think I took care of what you had going on, but again, if I missed anything, please let me know, okay? Anyway, that being said, I have some credentials, again, that I guess make me qualified to speak about the subject matter. I have a broker's license in several states. Been in real estate for almost 50 years now. This is really going crazy. And I do teach continuing education for attorneys and stuff like that. So any of this important. At the college level, I've taught pretty much all the classes you had to take to get your license. And so on the right-hand side, risk management's my game. It just really is. I'll be adding to that at the beginning of this year coming up. I will be chair of the California Association of Realtors Legal Affairs Forum. So keeping me busy, I appreciate it. And again, all of that designed, anything I can do to help you, please let me know. So we're going to be talking about stuff today. It's going to appear to be legal. I'm not a practicing attorney. I do a lot of trial work as an expert witness, and again, in a title. So the Department of Real Estate says you may not call yourself an expert except in a title. So certified distressed property expert, whatever. I am a court certified expert witness. Standard of care is my game. The agent's duties of inspection and disclosure, market conditions in San Diego County. Conversation today not intended to be a substitute for the advice of your broker, nor for that of your attorney. Please consult with them as appropriate. It's very important. You're paying them to be there. They want to hear from you. Okay, our talk today is intended to be interactive. And it looks like I might have lost Linda already. Nope, Linda's still there. Who did I lose? Please ask questions or offer input by utilizing the Q&A button. I do look forward to hearing from you, especially today, because now we're going to be talking about listing presentation, and I need to know what you're seeing out there, or if anything. I mean, I'm a practitioner like you, but I probably see things differently. Obviously, I have a couple of years in it. This morning, Master My Farm, that was kind of a fun one. And this afternoon, I really liked the winning listing presentation. I get all kinds of accolades on that. And so hopefully I'll be able to help you in your business. On Thursday morning, we'll be doing new and revised June 2023 CAR forms. And then in the afternoon, we'll be doing the leases and really how to create a template in zip forms. That's kind of a class I really love to teach, but they don't have me teaching that right now. And so I'd really like to be able to teach that at some point again. But I'll talk to them about that. And so member benefits today, thank you for joining us for our discussion of how to create the winning listing presentation. All right, so our goal here, your strategy, is to get 100% of the listings that you want to get. And I'm going to tell you, you may not want all of them, right? There's going to be some listings that you aren't going to want. And I can tell you from personal experience, I have taken listings I wish I had not taken. If your instincts tell you it's not going to be a good fit, then you might want to refer that one out. I know our brokers all tell us, get every listing and we'll figure it out. And I agree to some extent. However, there are some things that you may not want to get. So I don't know. I'll just kind of throw that out to you. I went on a listing appointment. I worked with law enforcement many decades ago, and I remember going on an appointment. A buddy of mine who was a sheriff's deputy, and I worked swing, he worked graveyard. And so the appointment started at 10 o'clock at night. And then, of course, around 2 in the morning, I realized he's just getting his second wind. And literally, I was there until 5 a.m. I got the listing, right? And I sold the house and everything. All that was cool. But at what cost, right? So I was exhausted. So, but anyway, the more listing appointments that you go on, the greater your chances of success, the more confident you will become, the calmer you will become, and it starts to make sense. And you need to create this, as we said this morning, it needs to be like a system. Okay, so the more successful you will be. All right, and that's what, again, I want to get 100% of the listings that I want to get. And we've had some interesting strategies. We'll talk about some of this as we go through today. So it is definitely a numbers game. So again, the more appointments you go on, the greater your chances of success. You get better and better with each appointment. I would tell you that if you're challenged for appointments, and you need to figure out how to get those appointments. I know of professionals who start calling in the morning. I spoke about one in particular this morning. They start calling in the morning and then go on the appointments that they created in the afternoon. So that's a constant process of turning deals. And so if you think about those numbers, can you imagine they probably make 100 phone calls to get maybe 5 appointments, or maybe 10 appointments, a 10% return, 10 appointments, that's probably pretty high. And then how many of those listings do they get? So maybe 4, maybe 3, but they're going out there too, and they're ready to walk away because guess what? They have another appointment. I remember one story in particular where the seller had asked the agent, the agent got up 15 minutes into the conversation and started leaving, and the seller said, "Where are you going?" He said, "Well, I got another appointment." And so the seller said, "Well, what about the listing?" And so the agent said, "Here, sign here," and ended up getting the listing. Now, I'm a strong believer in that your appointment needs to be focused around some different things, and this is what we're going to talk about now. But I want you to get the listing you want to get. It's one of the most fun things that we do, by the way. So I admit I have an attitude problem, and I know some of you who were on this morning's call, you probably agree. I just have an attitude problem. So early in my career, I went on a listing appointment thinking, oh my goodness, I hope I get this listing, right? Hi, Stephanie, welcome back. I hope I get this listing, right? This is when I first got started in real estate. Now when I go on a listing appointment, I think, do I want this thing? Do I want this listing? Again, over my career, I've had a lot of listings where I think, God, why did I do that? I really should. My gut told me not to do it. But at the end of the day, it's a very different mindset. Oh my God, I hope I get the listing. It is a panic position to come from versus I want to go there self-assured that I'm going to get to make the decision, not the seller. I get to make the decision whether or not I want that listing. Okay, so you got to be thinking that way. It's a mindset. It's an attitude problem. It's absolutely no doubt on that. It's definitely an attitude problem. So that's quite a difference in ideologies. So let's discuss some important points about positioning yourself for success. And so for some of you who've heard me talk before, this is all, I redesign each of these presentations right before doing them. So I've got some interesting new things that I've added. So first, I have a question. Will you be sending out a pre-listing packet? They were very popular for a long period of time. That's where the agent would make an appointment with someone, and then they would go ahead and send out the packet. Other agents, and they would actually have couriers dropping these off, rather than mailing them because they needed to get them there that day. And then we had the others that would be watching the MLS, and when a listing got to where it was 90 days on the market, they would assume that the listing was going to expire at that point, which is not really good logic. But their assumption was that it was a 90-day listing versus a 6-month listing, which is our office's policy. So you'd be sending out a listing packet. The problem was I'm not a big fan of all that. And the reason was because I was concerned about timing, that timing and soliciting the listing of another agent. So if that listing wasn't expiring in 90 days, then I've essentially sent out a listing packet that could put me in harm's way on that. Okay. And so I'm very sensitive to that. If somebody has a listing, I don't want to interfere with that contract. I literally, there's way too much business for all of us out here. Okay. So pre-listing packet, yes, no, kind of your call. It's a lot of work. I think you should spend your time on the phone call and setting the appointment, and then going on the appointment. So we're going to talk later. We're also going to talk about whether or not you need to bring a listing presentation with you. So make sure that all of the decision makers will be at the appointment. Now, so listen, personal experience. You've got husband and wife on title, for example. You get out there and the husband's there and the wife isn't. I've had it happen where the wife wasn't aware the home was for sale. That can be a scary proposition, right? So whoever's on title for sure needs to be at the appointment. Otherwise, it's really just and it may not be just those people whose names are on title. There could be other decision makers, and so you need to ask that question. Otherwise, your appointment is just a friendly gossip session. And again, husband and wife, only the husband's there, the wife is not there. I had an appointment with Scott, I don't know if you were there for it, but the property up in Leucadia where the seller was a trust, and the now I'm thinking that it was my former business partner was in that appointment. Anyway, it was a trust. We get there, I know the agents that are leaving their appointment with the seller, and we walk in, and it was interesting because there were 13 members of the trust, and of course there was also the signatory for the trust, and that was one individual who was in a wheelchair on a respirator, young man. And it turned out that they were all decision makers, but he was the one that was going to sign the document. So we had 13 people there, or 14 people, including him. So it was quite a crowd. We got the listing, of course, and it was kind of fortunate because my business partner at the time was a registered nurse, and all of these 13 were nurses as well. And the one in the wheelchair was passing away, and did pass after we closed the transaction, but he was obviously the responsible person for the trust. So make sure everybody that's a decision maker is going to be there at that appointment. And of those decision makers, you're going to need to quickly identify the key decision maker. And I'm going to tell you about some tricks that I did. It always had to do with seating and things like that on appointments, to decide which one was going to be the key decision maker. But I've had the luck in my career where I would go on an appointment with someone else, and we would know within a matter of seconds who was going to click with that, with who in that appointment. Sometimes I would click well with the husband. Sometimes I would click well with the wife. Sometimes the reverse with my business partner at the time. But you're going to have to make that decision, because they're the ones you want to be speaking to. And so sometimes it could be the 5-year-old. I've had that happen. I had a property up on 7th Street where the 5-year-old was clearly the one making the decisions. And so, the family was just there to support what he had to do. So it does happen. So make sure you've got everybody. And again, when I say all the decision makers, they may not be all the people on title. Obviously, Johnny's not on title. He doesn't have the capacity to contract. He's not of age. He's not age of consent. But I want to make sure. So, you'll have those situations where, well, mom lent us $50,000 to buy the house. So mom is a key decision maker while we're selling the house. So you've got the husband and wife maybe on title, but mom's not on title, but it was her money that bought the house. So you need to ask those questions. Is there anybody else involved in the decision to sell? Everybody okay with that? All right. The time that you spend in that first meeting is worth all the time, is worth more than all the time that you will spend with them later. I'm going to tell you this, it has happened to me. Most people that I know, when they go on a listing appointment, they want to get in, get out really fast. The only paperwork they bring with them is the listing agreement. I'm going to tell you that's probably a mistake. My style is more of bringing the whole file. I mean, I want to bring the whole packet. I did this recently in a transaction up in Lake Forest that I talk about a lot because it's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. So I went there on the appointment. I had everything. I had all of the forms that needed to be signed. I had all of the disclosures. I had the NHD. I had the HOA docs. I had everything at that appointment, and the seller signed everything. 3.5 hours, and the seller signed everything at that appointment. I knew I had the two decision makers. And they were both there at that meeting, and we did all of the disclosures. And the reason we did that was because I needed to make sure all the people authorized to sign were signing. But at the same time, I knew that if I had all the disclosures signed, that an offer that came in, the buyer would I would be sending over all of the disclosures with that offer, with the counter offer, and the buyer would not have that 3-day right of rescission, which is such a powerful thing for a buyer to do. So 3.5 hours. Never had to go up there again. I sent people up there to do open houses, but I did not have to personally go there. And that was all because of all the time I spent with the seller. Maybe they were just tired of me, right? Maybe that could have been it. I did have a business partner who said they will sign anything just to shut you up. I'm good with that. I get a lot of signatures on things, so we're okay. But just be aware that that initial appointment is the most important one. So that strategy of going in, getting the form signed, and then having the TC send everything. Okay, I get it. But you still need to make sure that you're communicating with your client and make sure that you have sealed the deal, essentially. Make sure there aren't any questions that are still on the table, so to speak. Okay. All right. So it's okay to have a long listing appointment. I think so. I believe in long appointments. I'm going to sit there. I'm going to talk to them. I'm going to spend some time, answer their questions, and do things like that. And I historically always get comments like, "Thank you so much for answering all of our questions. We feel great about it." Obviously we're moving forward. So you have 3 choices of venues. So let's talk about, where are you going to meet the person? Okay, so you can go to their house. That's a personal favorite of mine. I prefer to go to the house because there's a lot I can figure out at the house. There's a lot of input that I'm going to get on that appointment, and we're going to talk about that here in a second. So probably my favorite choice, but again, I have some challenges if I go to their house because now they're emotionally involved. And again, you notice I call it a house. We're trying to get them to think of it in terms of a material object. It's a house, not their home, not where they raised their kids, all of that stuff that all plays in to their decision. I've had sellers talk themselves out of selling the house right on that appointment. So you go to the owner's house, you've got some pluses to that, you got some minuses to that. You can have the owner come to the office or some other public place. That's probably my second favorite way to do things. But either way of these two, I'm going to be explaining the forms to the client as we're moving forward in the transaction. Okay, so and I'm going to have all the papers. That's what I'm going to do. I like papers, or maybe I sit with them and go through everything. But then also I can send, while I'm sitting with them, I can send things to them for electronic signature that they can do on their end, so that we're not doing paper. But then the third one is doing everything over the internet, and I think sadly that is more common. And of course now with the COVID coming back, doing everything over the internet will start to come on again, and I think that creates one of our greater challenges. So in my conversations with the Department of Real Estate, they have said that whether you're doing it over the internet or whether you're going to their house, we really think you really need to be going over all these forms with the client. Don't just have the client sign something just because it's got a place for them to sign it. You need to be reviewing it with them. And that includes listing agreements. That includes purchase agreements for buyers. Again, I did a presentation for the Department of Real Estate last year. It was a 4-hour presentation on the RPA. Are you going to spend 4 hours going over the purchase agreement with your client online? I would suggest to you that it can't be less than an hour. I know that I share with fellow attorney instructors, all kinds of weird noises out here fellow attorney instructors who have said we can't explain the RPA in less than 3 hours. So when you're talking with your client and you're going to do this all on the internet, let's not just send everything to the client and tell them to figure it out. Let's go over it with them online. And again, when I did the class that I did for the department, we had 400 special investigators. It was a 4-hour class, and I really felt like I hadn't covered everything. Do everything over the internet. Okay, just make sure you're explaining, especially the disclosures, to them. Okay, all right, all of the above have their pluses and minuses, and we covered some of those things while we were talking here just now. Anybody have any questions about any of this, what we're talking about, any of that? I'm gonna grab a drink of water. A lot of water. Okay, all right. Seeing none. Appearances. I think you should dress for success. Dress like you want the listing. At one point I had a Ferrari, and I would never park it out in front of the house because I kind of felt like, oh, gee, I'll look really ostentatious me having a Ferrari. So I park it around the corner, so I want to look successful, but I don't want to look out of control, right? I mean, so when I say dress for success, dress appropriately. Okay, so business casual is probably the best way to go. All right. So, I mean, do you need a suit and a tie and all that kind of stuff? I can tell you that if you show up at the appointment looking like a professional, then they're going to figure that you're successful and they want to work with you because you're a professional. Now, if you're surfing buddies, maybe the appropriate thing is the cutoffs and the whatever, surf trousers. Jessica, if you choose to meet the seller at the office, do you price the home without seeing it first? Jessica, that's a great question. I don't know. When I do my estimate of the value of the property, I look at it differently than the seller would look at it. And thank you. Your question's a really good question. So the seller is going to be thinking, we're going to talk about pricing strategies here in a minute, but the seller is going to think that the property is worth X. I'm going to think it's probably worth a different figure, but I'm going to use data sources like an RPR that goes to 300 databases to get its information, includes for sale by owners and things like that. So I'm probably going to be more detached from the decision about what the property's worth than the seller's going to be. Now, but you're right. I always ask the seller, and we'll see this in a minute too, can you give me a list of upgrades or anything you've done to the property since you moved into it, or anything that's going to set it apart from the other properties in the neighborhood that are going to make it a win? And so the answer is, if they're coming into the office, I don't have a chance really to look through the house to determine. I mean, they could be hoarders. It could be stacked to the ceiling. I've sold houses like that. I've sold houses with 2 inches of dog feces on the floors. I've had a couple of experiences in my career. So do I price it without seeing it? I'm gonna probably first of all have that conversation with the seller when they come in. I had a property. The property was owned by an attorney, a probate attorney actually, and he owned the property. And so I showed up. He wasn't living in it anymore. He'd moved on to another house, and so I showed up at the appointment. And I had the estimate of the value of the property, which I had, at the time, it was a $345,000 home in Vista. And of course, he's there. He says, well, Pillow says it's worth 420,000. And of course, I'm looking at my data and I'm going, okay, great, here we go. And he says, but I don't want 420,000. I'm thinking, phew. And he goes, I want 449,000. I think it's worth more than Pillow is saying that it's worth. And so it was just a crazy, and so sure enough, we put it on the market for 449, and then we just started working the reduction. I mean, he wasn't getting any showings, wasn't getting any offers. And again, based on my estimate, we were $100,000 overpriced. So, what was really odd is right towards the end of the year, we got to November, And then he says to me, he says, I've really got to sell this house. And I found out later on from another attorney, actually the referring attorney, why he was having to sell the house. You know what I ended up? I got 345 for it, which is what I said it was worth all along. We had an offer come in, and that was the settled price on the property. So trust your instincts, but be prepared for that conversation. And I'm going to talk to you in a minute about how to get around all that. So, but yeah, am I going to price it? Yeah, I'll price it without seeing it if I have to. But then I'm going to tell the seller it's going to be subject to our inspection of the property. And so remember that when you take a listing, you have 48 hours after obtaining all of the necessary signatures to put the listing into the multiple listing service. Okay, so I'm going to probably take that listing from the seller in the office, but then I'm going to go ahead, within 48 hours, I want to see the inside of it, because, and I tell the seller this, I may want to adjust my estimate of what it's worth. And again, in your RPR program, it actually allows you to include improvements to the property, how much they cost, when they were put into the property, but also to detract from a property if it's not in good condition. Okay. All right. So, Jessica, great question. Thank you so much. Think about mirror matching. And so mirror matching. So when we're talking about dressing for success, like I said a second ago, I mean, if we're all surfing buddies, then we're going to probably dress differently. Am I going to come in a three-piece suit? Probably not. If everybody else is showing up, obviously, after they got out of the water. So that kind of thing. So mirror matching, try to mirror what your client is doing. But remember, you always have to be a stroke above, because you are the professional in this transaction. Okay. So remember, you never get a second chance to make a good first impression. I learned that from my former business partner. So I always try to make a good first impression, because if I don't, it's going to be something that's going to be difficult to recover from. So I always put this in here: do not wear sunglasses at the first meeting. I mean, I don't care how cool you think it is. It tends to be a turnoff. People decide that they want to work with you based on eye contact. And if you're wearing sunglasses, you're probably not going to have really good eye contact. Okay. So I would suggest that you not wear sunglasses. I know we got the Gucci's, we got the whole thing going on, but I don't think it's appropriate. That's just my thing. So, okay, take with you to the appointment. And the first thing we want to take with us is confidence, right? And so that's just something that you're just going to have to remember the steps that we went through. The more listing appointments that you go on, the more confident you will become. So we have this thing called a PMA, and that's my positive mental attitude, right? So you got to have positive mental attitude. You got to really, if you go in like a hungry dog chasing squirrel, if you read Robert Ringer's book, Winning Through Intimidation, if you go in like that, then you're probably going to have trouble in the appointment, right? But if you go in being confident, not arrogant, but confident about it, you'll be in better shape about that. So again, I always stress reading books on the subjects and doing things like that. How about my clipboard? I'm a big clipboard guy. All right. So what does that translate to? So I believe in going to an appointment with a clipboard because I want to write notes. And so I'm gonna attach my listing input sheet with it. Now I know nobody has told you about this, but there is such a thing called a listing input sheet. And so here's the listing input sheet that comes out of our MLS. All right. So why do I take this with me? Because it's a lot like, why do we have to read you your rights when we've got them memorized, right? So, well, the reason is because I need to go through this list. Now, the top part of this, and this is in your MLS, by the way, the top part of this is all the stuff that you're going to know about the property. You really don't need any input from the seller. I've already input a lot of things like our company's number and the office name. Is it a variable rate commission? No, we just don't do things like that. Listing service only? No. Entry only? No. We're not a limited service, we're full service. The things I don't know the answers to, I don't fill out. So our agents use this when they go on an appointment. So I've already checked the boxes by virtue of how we do business. But when I get down into some of these things, so Jessica, you're right, residential style, I probably have that down before I go on the appointment, but I'm probably also going to, this is one of the most common mistakes I see in the MLS, is I'm going to take an exclusive authorization right to sell. It's the most powerful type of listing agreement. Exclusive agency says that the seller can sell the house themselves. They don't have to use me. They don't have to pay me. We're just not going to do that. Our MLS does accept those types of listings, but our company policy is a no. Open listing, again, our company policy is no. And so, but really we only have the 3 different types of listing agreements, and those are the 3 that I just described to you there. Okay, so a net listing, by the way, is as close to an illegal listing as you're going to get. So we don't even have a form for that. The Department of Real Estate believes that it is the one form or the one type of listing that lends itself most to the most possibility for fraud and deceit on the seller. So the rest of this, we get our records from the assessor or from the public record. And then when I go down further, now I get into the part where, I kind of need to see the place, but I can go over these with the seller. And so I want to go over them with the seller because I want the seller to describe to me the features about their property. Okay, so square footage, again, some of the stuff I already know the answer to. Units in the complex, unit in the building, I can get that from title. And then I get down here, and some of the more important things, there's 2 things that your MLS requires of you before you put the listing in the MLS. One of them is the room dimensions. So the approximate room dimensions are a requirement of our MLS. You can get a variance request, but it's only for a couple of days. They want the room dimensions. And so we're going to talk about how important that is in a minute. The second thing that they're looking for is a picture of the property, right? So let's go to that in just one moment. But you can see some of the stuff, and everything with blue I need to know the answers to. So I'm going to be asking the seller what all these things are. I sure don't want to come, get back to the office and then go, oh gosh darn it, I forgot to ask him, does it have air conditioning? I don't know. I've sent these to sellers to complete. I find that it can be overbearing on them. But there's some things in here like the equipment. What kind of equipment's going to convey, right? Is it a double oven? Are you going to leave the double oven, or are we going to take it out? What's the heat source? Laundry. What does the laundry look like? Dirty. I know, I get it. The guest house, things like that. So, what's the source of heat? Is radiant electric heat. There's some people that don't like that. So I'm going to be asking the seller all these questions so that I can get the answers directly from the seller. So this is why I take this with me on the appointment, and I have it there for the seller to help me fill it out. Now, you'll notice, and I'm going to talk about this in a few minutes, but the last thing that I produce for the seller is going to be the listing agreement, and I'm going to show you how I do that. So number 2, my clipboard, my listing input sheet is attached. Copies of anything that you plan to leave with the owner. You'll have those owners that will say to you, I'd like to read over and think about it overnight. Okay, so I've had people do that. I'm not leaving the room. So I have that personality that I'm going to get them to think about it right now. I can stay while you're thinking about it, but you're going to have those kinds of people that are going to say, you know what, I want to be thinking about this overnight kind of thing. You never leave copies of your listing agreement, okay? And this is in caps. Never leave copies of your listing agreement. I want to review the listing agreement. Okay, well, let's do that here. I've just gone over it with you. What part of this do you need an explanation on? What part do you not understand? I mean, I'll leave them the environmental hazards booklet. I'll leave them some of that other stuff, but they may really not be looking for anything except the listing agreement, but I'm taking that with me. I'm not leaving that, okay? Period, right? Because what do? They use that on the next agent that comes in the door, and here's what this other guy was going to do, and of course the other agent's not going to go, oh no, that was Kevin Burke. I'm not going to mess with that. We're not going to be counting on that. Okay, so never leave a copy of the listing agreement. If I'm going to leave anything, it might be some promotional material, but I'm not going to leave any of our forms. I mean, invariably they'll try to use your forms to do a transaction on their own, so we want to watch out for that too. Okay. Are they going to just use our forms to do their own transaction? And that's going to be definitely a copyright violation, as well as other things. I went on a not a listing appointment. I went on an appointment I had a buyer. I had a buyer representation agreement with the buyer. I called the seller, and now at that point I had the buyer in the room with me, and I should have probably told the seller that, but the The seller was a for sale by owner in Santa Luz. And so I called the seller up and I said, I'd like to come in. I'd like to present an offer for our buyer on your property. And so, they had asked me about my credentials, who I was. And so in the course of the conversation, they said to me, well, we'd like to represent you. Would you represent us too? And I said, well, I have a buyer representation agreement with the buyer. Let me check with the buyer. And so they said, okay, go ahead. And I said, oh, okay. And I turned to the buyer and I said, is it okay if I represent the seller too? And they said, sure, not a problem at all. And of course, at that point, now the seller was aware that everybody had been listening in on the conversation. But my goal was I was going to do my appointment in person. I wasn't going to do this on the phone. When I got there to the property, I said to the seller, how did you get here? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, you must have sold a property to buy this property, and now you're selling this one for sale by owner. And he says, well, I was for sale by owner when I sold the other property. And I said, really? So who provided the disclosures? And he says, well, escrow did. And I said, well, escrow doesn't provide disclosures. I mean, they're not allowed to legally. They're not allowed to do that. You don't have a real estate license, right? Well, then title did it. I said, title can't do it either. So I said, and you haven't been sued yet? And he goes, no. And I go, okay, all right. Well, I was just kind of curious. So I don't know, but they were for sure wanting me to sell their house. I ended up becoming the seller's agent and the buyer's agent in that transaction. Funny thing was, when it closed, they disappeared completely. I couldn't get a hold of them. I don't know where they went, but I think they were that afraid that something was going to happen with the previous sale. Our sale they knew was going to be okay, but the previous sale. So again, I would not have left them with any forms because they might have tried the same thing that they did before, because the one thing they didn't have was our forms. Okay. All right. So that being said, tape measure. And this is part of one of my favorite things to do. So when I go to the property, I have to have a tape measure, remember, because I've got that listing input sheet that's going to ask me for room dimensions. Okay. So let's pull that back up again. I just want to show you on my room dimensions. Good. On my room dimensions, it asks, I guess we're going to have to change this. We're no longer calling it the master, now it's the primary. But I'm always going to put my room dimensions in with the larger number first, okay? Because I tell this to the seller, because I put in the larger, does it make the room look bigger? Well, not really, but at least it gives the impression it might be bigger. So I always do that, okay? And I need to be fairly accurate on my room dimensions, and we're going to talk about that in a second. So I've got my tape measure, and I tell the seller that our MLS requires that you input the room dimensions. So we have to do this. Okay. And so that's why we have the tape measure. So I bring the tape measure, I bring a camera. So the room dimensions are going to be, again, length times width. Okay. Not height. If you did height, that would give you volume, right? And so interestingly enough, it's on some state exams that I teach, but they're not really, what would your application, if I was going to fill the room up with water, then this would be the volume, but I just don't see that happening, right? So they're really just looking for length times width, okay? All right, have the seller hold the business end of the tape measure. And I always say it that way, right? And so when they ask, what do you mean by the business end? Your response is, that's the end that you get sued on. So we want to be really careful about those measurements. We want to make sure we get it as accurate as possible. Now, our MLS does not allow for 0.2 or anything. So what do? Do you round up, round down? I'm going to round up if it's over 5, round down if it's below 5. But because our MLS requires it, that also provides us with some protection, much like the square footage is required, even though it's the #1 litigated issue against real estate agents. The square footage I'm going to get from the county tax record. And so I'm going to have that. And then again, I'm going to tell the seller, I'm showing the square footage at 1,200 square feet. Do you agree? Again, they're going to sign that listing input sheet that I showed you a minute ago down at the bottom. I should have probably shown you that. Let me pull this back up, and then I'm going to take us down to the bottom. And down here, after we filled everything out, the seller is going to go ahead and sign it right here. So, that takes some of the reliability off of me, because, now I've got the seller agreeing that this is what the above was like. Now, I know that 99% of the real estate agents out there probably don't even use the listing input sheet anymore. What they do is they just, try to remember in their head, and then when they go into the MLS and they turn the computer on, they just manually try to do everything that they remembered. Well, do you really want to get on the phone with the seller, or really want to start sending emails to the seller saying, I don't remember if it's a gas dryer or a gas stove or those kinds of things? Remember, I want to spend a long time at the appointment. I want to go over the appointment with the seller. I want it to be very clear that I know what I'm doing and I'm asking all the relevant questions. Okay. So I want to spend time there because I'm really delaying as long as I can to not do the listing agreement just yet. That's the last document I ever have them sign. Okay. So be sure that if you're going to measure, we have all these gadgets now for electronic measurement of the room dimensions. If you're going to do that, I would make sure you verified it. Please don't ever copy another agent's homework. I say this, and I've had so many lawsuits where the agent copied. I mean, I remember I had one in Del Mar where, frankly, in the Bluffs, where the room dimensions had been copied from agent to agent. Well, 5 agents ago, the agent put down the wrong room dimensions, and so then 1, 2, 3, 4 more agents relied on that. They copy and pasted it into their listing, and it's akin to copying HOA dues, only to find out that the dues have gone up $100 a month. So you really don't want that to happen. Okay, so be careful about copying other people's homework. Make sure you verify all that information. All right. Camera. I think a good camera. I think a camera better than a cell phone camera. But some of you know that if you're running those new iPhone cameras, and I'm an Android guy, but some of those cameras are really good. I mean, I kind of worry about the picture that it takes of me because I'm not that good looking. You know what I'm saying? So when I'm taking pictures of the room, or obviously I'm not in the picture, but I might want to use a really good camera. In the old, I've seen some pictures that were really ugly taken of a property, that was very clearly, obviously, the agent's cell phone camera. Okay, and so make sure your camera's good resolution, good quality. All right. Okay. Remember that the MLS requires that you include at least one picture. Okay, within 3 days of inputting the listing. So if you don't put that in, if you don't put a picture in, immediately at the time of saving the listing, it's going to warn you that you've got 3 days. And the ticket's roughly $150. So, just take a picture. Today is Tuesday. You've got the professional photographer coming out on Thursday. You've already made the appointment. So, take something to put it in the MLS and then wait till you get all those other pictures, and then you can always replace it. But have something, okay? All right. Marketing examples. So, for the longest time, I was running full-page ads in the Union Tribune, and so I would cut those all out. In fact, frankly, I just threw away a bunch of stuff from the 90s and the 2000s, things that I was doing. I don't know, they just kept going from place to place, and so again, the marketing examples are, you tell the seller, this is what we're going to do for you. And so obviously a full page ad has some impact. Nowadays, most everything's done on the internet. So, maybe show your website, maybe show what you're showcasing other properties, show their IDX solution, things like that. You might bring a small laptop for that, or a tablet or something along that end. And so again, mostly internet today. I think that people are aware of that. It's a lot of, people that are in Japan wanting to buy a house in San Diego are not going to be, ordering the San Diego Union Tribune, right? I mean, no offense to the Union Tribune. They're going to go online and look at the Union Tribune. So you're going to need to have that internet component of things. And they're not going to buy the house off the internet. I've had that happen very, very few times where they bought something based on what they saw on the internet. But again, you got to have the presence. Okay. All right. So listing presentation packet, if any. So and for there, what I'm talking about is that if you actually have a presentation, if you actually have a presentation, I've had people try to put them together, try to create them. I think it's really, I think once you get there, I remember I went on an appointment over on Ocean View Avenue in Del Mar, and I get there, I have this great big thick book with pictures and and diagram, pictures with diagrams and arrows on the back of each one and stuff like that from Alice's Restaurant. Great big thing. I get there with my business partner, and the sellers, Mr. and Mrs., were dressed to the nines, right? And so I get there, and by the way, the property was currently listed. So again, remember, you may not solicit the listing of another agent. Now, in this case, the seller solicited me. So the seller called me and said, I want you to come over, to list my house. And so when I got to the house, I said, well, you're listed already with another broker. And they said, yeah, we're canceling that listing because, that the buyer, we were under contract with the buyer, but the buyer decided that, after removing all of their contingencies, the buyer decided that they didn't like the rumor that the city of Del Mar was going to be putting the fire station, in the old town hall building, and they didn't want a fire station across the street. So these two were litigating over the deposit. They knew that there's no list pendants on the property, but they were suing each other who was going to get the deposit. So again, technical points of law. Mrs. Seller, by the way, is a practicing attorney. Mr. Seller, a national speaker. So like I said, again, they were obviously very well dressed. We're there to do business. I've got my listing presentation book. And I said, well, let's go ahead and take a look. And so he stops me and he says, we have a dinner we have to be at in 15 minutes. Okay. And then he said to me, he says, how much are you going to get me, and how much are you going to charge me to get there? It changed my life in real estate. It really did when he made that statement. He was obviously a very capable speaker. He says, how much are you going to get me, and how much are you going to charge me to get there? And I said, well, I think the property's worth what you're currently under contract for. And he says, okay, I agree. And I said, here's how much I charge. And he goes, huh. And I go, well, how much is the other guy charging you? And he says, well, he's doing me a favor. He charged me less than he would normally have charged. And so, you know what I said? I said, well, that didn't sell the property, did it? And so I don't know where it came from. My business partner sitting next to me going, what the hell did he just say, right? So that didn't sell it, did it? Okay, I didn't say anything bad about the other agent. The other agent's a friend of mine, right? Or at least a business acquaintance. I'm not sure if he's friends with anybody. I don't know. But, at the end of the day, the commission that this guy was getting, clearly they ended up in a lawsuit, and it wasn't the agent's problem, but the agent was going to be ousted because they had to be. And I took the listing and I got my full commission on it. He thought about it and he said, okay, fine, you can have your commission. All right. And I did, and I sold it in 3 days. Right. So, it was a saleable property. I mean, it came out of the MLS. I put it back in under our ticket. So the point is that listing presentation packet was not going to be looked at that appointment. And frankly, I've ever had that happen. I know that Greg Newman's got an excellent listing presentation packet. Obviously, other people create that for him. We've had agents in our office try to create them. And a lot of times it's just pretty stuff about me and all the things I've done and stuff like that. And so if you've got that, take it with you. At least you'll have something to show them. This is me on stage. It's so funny. I just found a bunch of pictures of me in a fashion show, obviously 30 years ago, a fashion show for association's fashion show. And so, are those the kind of things I would put in there? Probably not. But that's kind of the point behind the package. So let me open the door. There we go. Okay. All right. So listing presentation, yes, no. There's some really good presentations out there. If your brokerage has one, use it, right? You should be proud of the brokerage that you're with. You should, brand it. So the listing presentation packet has its pluses and minuses. Comp analysis. So how am I going to do that? How am I going to figure out the value? And we talked a little bit about this already. I like RPR. I taught it for when it first came out. I taught it for a decade, and then I just got too busy. So, but it's an NAR product. It utilizes over 300 data sources. You've also got your CMA out of your MLS, the comparative market analysis, but that only has MLS data only. So what we used to do in the old days was we'd have our CMA, but then we would reach out to title and we would ask them for all of their, the sold comps, as we called them, and then we would hold them up to the light and try to come up with a value to get a value of the property. So that's kind of the analysis behind that. And again, I taught RPR for many years, and I like to use it. How about your CV? Your curriculum vitae. I don't know. I always thought that it was better to be interested than interesting. And so, again, I want to be memorable on my appointment. So I'm probably going to ask a lot of questions. I remember a listing appointment that I went on, and I thought for sure we were going to lose Linda because it was her very first listing appointment. And again, the seller was an attorney. I had sent all the paperwork to the seller in advance of the appointment. But when I got there, I asked a lot of questions. Okay. So, and of course, as Linda will tell you, I'm a very different person in that appointment than I was in class. In class, I'm lecturing, but when I'm on an appointment, I'm asking a lot of questions. And so I was very interested in what the client was trying to do. Why are they selling? Things like that. So I asked a lot of questions. I already sent them over my CV. They had plenty of time to review that. And actually, in the course of the conversation, the seller had the listing agreement. They were signing everything. They didn't care about how much I was charging, how much, that kind of thing. They get down to the arbitration provision, and they break out a red pen or a green pen, and they draw a line through it, kind of like my green and red theme here today. So they draw a line through the arbitration. Says, I'm not going to agree to arbitration. And again, at the time, I'm the broker for the company, and so I broke out my red pen because I'm teach in the colleges. I got a red pen. I crossed it off too. We both initialed our changes. We both agreed that we weren't going to arbitrate. We're going to sue each other. Now there was not a chance in a blue moon that this seller was going to sue me. And I wasn't going to sue him. I didn't care, right? But it was. I thought it was hysterically funny. Unfortunately, Linda was having a meltdown. She's like, when we left the thing, she's going, "What did you just do?" And I said, we agreed that we're going to sue each other. And she says, well, you told me never to cross off the pre-printed language in the contract. And that's true. But I said, in this situation, I'm the broker, and this guy's not going anywhere. And we did. We ended up selling the house, and everything was fine. And Linda recovered from it. So it was all good. So just be aware, don't be crossing off any of the pre-printed language, because, again, we don't even have the strikeout provision in the zip forms program. And in California, in other states, we do, where they actually strike out language. Again, in California, we believe that's legal advice, and I agree. Okay. So how about some opening lines? Let's talk about some opening lines in my conversation. And this is one of the most important questions that you're going to ask the seller. Can you take me on a brief tour of the property? I do this walking in the door. Can you take me on a brief tour? Okay. And then secondly, do you mind if I take notes? And again, remember, the notes are for their benefit. I'm going to write down notes, and I'm going to write them all down, their responses. I'm going to write them all down on the clipboard. Okay. Because I've got that listing input sheet. Remember, this is kind of like a really cool crutch for me. I'm checking things off and doing all that. Seller says, well, there's marks on the kitchen door jamb. Those are my little boy as he was growing up, and, he's gone off to college, that kind of thing. And so I don't want to spend too much time on that, because I don't want them to start, thinking about it as a home again, but it's really just a house, and they want to move on to something else. But I always ask them to give me a tour, do it whatever way you want to do it. I always go left to right. I do it a clockwise direction, go through the entire house, and taking notes as I am on my clipboard, right? And I get permission. I always want to ask for permission, because it also tells them that what they have to say is important to me. And most sellers will appreciate that you do that. You're not recording their conversation. I wouldn't do that, right? But I do want to, get their permission to take notes, so that I'll have more information on the listing. And plus, remember, how many times am I going to be in this property? Not a whole bunch, but I want to be able to answer buyers' questions about that. This works, by the way, on that appointment where I don't even have the listing yet, right? So when I start to do all this stuff, right? Remember the last guy or gal that came in, tried to get him to sign something and then left, right? I'm coming in there, I'm taking the time, I'm spending time with them. By the time we're done, like my former business partner said, they'll sign anything to get rid of you. Okay. All right. So write everything down again on your listing input sheet in front of them. Ask questions. I've gone so far as to say, hang on a second. I want to make sure I got that right. Okay. And then I'll stop everybody and then I'll start writing. I'll say, okay, so you said this. I'll make a production out of it. Okay. Because remember, we're actors in a dress rehearsal, so to speak. But you want to make, it a point that it's important what they have to say. If they're really fast talkers, then I'll start asking them to repeat themselves, okay? Because their brain's just moving way ahead of the curve. All right. So while they're speaking and you are listening, so remember, your job is to ask questions and then listen to the response. Make sure you're listening to their response. It makes them feel better. I learned this with Linda. Linda, sometimes she just has to say something. I'm not being asked to fix anything. I'm not being asked to respond to it. I just need to let her speak what she has to say, and then she's done with it. Okay. And that, I don't know, maybe that works in your world too, but with sellers, I want to make sure I give them an opportunity to speak their piece, okay? Let them lead you through the house. Don't you go first, okay? Why? Because if you do, you're taking control, and you're taking control in their domain. You want them to take you around. Now, they're not going to say, and there's the toilet. They're not going to be like that, right? They're just going to take you through the rooms. If I got to slow them down, I will, but it's not my house. Okay, so let them lead you through the house. They will tell you where the signing room is, because as you go through the house, invariably the one room we don't want to spend a lot of time in is the primary bedroom, the master bedroom. Get a look and then get out, because they're going to probably be uncomfortable that some other people are in the room. Okay. The garage always tends to be the last place that people look, but that's, the husband's in the garage, the wife's in the kitchen. I've had it, by the way, be reversed many times where the seller, the buyer, Mr. Buyer was a gourmet chef, and he was just drooling over the kitchen, what the seller had done to the kitchen. So, don't assume anything, but they're going to tell you where the signing room is. A lot of times, it could be in the kitchen, it could be in the living room, it could be in the dining room, but don't you assume. I let them close me. Okay. Does everybody understand? And let them sit first. This is so important. Let them sit first. Why? Because you want to avoid sitting on someone's throne, right? But where they sit or where they want to do this is going to tell you a lot about who the decision maker is. Okay, if you haven't figured it out already, he holds the chair for the wife. Maybe the wife is the queen, she's the decision maker, or he goes and sits in his chair before anybody else sits down. Let him sit first. It's very important. Okay. Again, it'll also tell you who's in charge. Seller only cares about two things. So remember my conversation with the Ocean View seller. So you need to be prepared for the discussion. Okay, so let's prepare for that. How much are you going to get me? How much are you going to charge me to get there? Remember that appointment? I learned a lot. It was a turning point in my career. I figured, oh, I get it now. Years in real estate, and I finally understood. It's all they care about. They don't care about anything else. They don't care about your disclosures or natural hazard disclosures or any of that kind of stuff. They're counting on you to know what you're doing. And so let's talk about the first one. How much are you going to get me? So remember that people buy on emotion, they sell on fact. Okay, so I'm just going to assume that in this case, I'm with the seller. So I'm just assuming that they're selling because they have a reason to sell. They just don't like, they're just not thinking, oh, well, why don't we just start having people come in here and tell us how much our house is worth? No, they've got to sell the house and they have a reason for selling it. Okay. All right. So there can be a lot of reasons, right? Like, you know, and I'll ask them later and they'll say, well, we want to be with the grandkids in Idaho or, you know, something like that. Okay. So sell on fact, find out what those motivators are because you want to come back to those later. So in my conversation about how much you're going to get me, present your visuals, whatever you've got, your RPR, your CMAs, those things, present your rationale. Go through why you think the property is what it's worth. Okay. Now, some agents will go in. We have a term in real estate called freezing out. That's where the agent takes the listing at whatever cost, whatever price, just to get the listing, just to get rid of everybody else, freezing them out. Again, it could be a DRE violation, but then they start working the reduction. And I've gone on listing appointments where I've told the seller, you know, this is how much your house is going to sell for. They ended up listing it with another agent who agreed with them on how much they thought it was worth. And then ultimately closing is exactly what I said it would close for. Okay. It happens so many times. So you've got to be able to convince them that you are being honest with them up front on the listing appointment, and that you obviously expect them to reciprocate that. So always ask them the question, what would an appraiser say? So the property's only worth what it's worth, right? And in some areas, you've got, you know, cookie cutter houses, we call them, you know, where I can compare one with the other without too much difficulty. But in other houses, you know, other areas, it might be like Del Mar, for example, you know, very unique designs, you know, interesting little things. And it's really hard to come up with a value. But at some point, if the buyer's getting financing or the buyer may even be paying cash, may be also asking an appraiser's opinion. And so what you want to do is say to the seller, what do you think an appraiser would say? Okay, so looking at what does the appraiser base their opinion on? So be realistic with the seller, be honest with them when it comes to pricing, show them the data, and then have them sign off on it. So I want to be, you know, again, if my RPR says it's worth 345, then I'm going to have the seller sign that. Okay, we'll go ahead and we'll price it at 449, but I'm going to bring you back to this RPR that says this is how much it's worth. And again, if you overprice the property in the beginning, I've got a couple of these right now where they're getting all these low offers, and the reality of it is that you know, it's sitting on the market, and in this market, a property that sits on the market is just going to bring in the groundswell of, you know, sharks, shall we say? Okay, all right. So the seller prices the property. I always love this saying: seller prices the property. At least that's what they think, right? It's the buyer that determines the ultimate sales price. So yeah, the seller picks the price that they would like to get, but at the end of the day, the buyer is going to ultimately be the one that's going to tell you how much it's going to be worth. So do your list price versus sales price narrative. You need to look up, you know, your competition in the neighborhood. Who are people that are strong listing agents in that neighborhood, and pull up their listings and take a look from their listings, and you can search by their MLS numbers in the MLS, and look at their listings and see what the original list price was compared to the ultimate sales price. Now you're going to get your list price to sales price narrative down, where your listings are hopefully selling for close to what you tell them it's going to sell for. But you tell the seller, if you list in this scenario where you're way up here, look at the list price versus sales price. You know, you have time for that? I mean, you wait 6 months and then you're going to sell it for what I told you it would sell for. Okay, so do your list price and sales price narrative. All right, so that gap, and hopefully yours is a very narrow gap. So pricing strategy. Buyers look in increments of $50,000. I mean, today it just is what it is. When I first started selling houses, you know, $18,000 houses, you know, they weren't looking at $50,000 increments. We were looking at $50 increments, right? So just remember that today we're dealing with the median priced home is around $1 million in San Diego. These are going to be $50,000, you know, here's and there. So what happens if you price the property high? If you price it too high, you sit. And I tell this to the seller: you price it too high, you sit. You price it and you wait for the market to come to you. This is important, right? You wait for the market to come to you. You price it low, you create your own market. People, you'll have that feeding frenzy where you've probably, obviously not, 100,000, but if you price it right, you'll get a whole bunch of offers, and then you'll most times I end up closing it for more than we were asking. So, we had a transaction recently in Coronado. It's somebody else's transaction where they priced the property $1,250,000. They had 8 all cash offers, all over asking price. They went under contract at $1,750,000, $500,000 more, just because these people all wanted this property. And there just wasn't any inventory in the area. And so ultimately they go under contract for $1,750,000. They get $1,950,000 offer, but again, it came in after the seller already agreed to the contract. So be aware that you pricing of the property is one of the most important things that you do. Okay, very simple. Discuss other properties in the marketplace. So I always tell them this. I say, here's my list. I'm going to give them a CMA. Here's my active listings. Okay, these are your current competition. So when I show them the MLS, the comps, these are your current competition, right? The pending listings, and by the way, on the active listings, they go, well, my house is better because I raised my kids in it. Okay, well, maybe not. They may feel the same way, but these are the ones you're going to be competing with when you go live on the market. My pending listings, this is the price that it took to get an offer. Okay, all right, so this is not what it's going to ultimately sell for necessarily, but this is what price it was that got the offer to come in. Okay, and so this number tends to be lower than the actives are higher. Then I have my expired listings, and these are the highest of them, right? This is the price that was too high and did not sell the property. Okay, so my highest prices are almost always my expired. My next one are almost always my actives. Then I have my pendings, and then I have my solds. Okay, so sold, this is what the ready, willing, and able buyer was willing to pay for the property. Okay, so and that, by the way, is what the appraiser is going to look at. The appraiser is going to look at the sold listings, right? And if they don't have enough solds, they might look at pendings. But typically, if you explain to them what appraisers do, they'll realize that I can't just make up a number and come up with whatever the heck I want for the property. Okay, so Mr. and Mrs. Seller, what column do you want to be in? I always ask them, which column do you want to be in? Okay, all right, and that's important. And by the way, I asked the question, I stopped talking. That's important too. I just stopped talking. I let them answer the question. Okay. All right. Now it's time to close on price. Okay. So know your scripts. And so when I say the price, I'm talking about the commissions, right? So that's number 2. How much are you going to charge me to get there? That's what they got going on in their head. Okay. So let's talk about that. Have a plan. Don't be afraid of the question, folks. They're going to ask it. They're going to ask you, how much are you going to charge me, right? Now, for me, remember, the last document they're ever going to sign is the listing agreement. By the time I get to the listing agreement, I have earned my medal, as we say. Okay, I've gone through all the disclosures. I'm going to show you how I do my presentation here in just a second. But they're going to ask the question. Don't be afraid of it. They think that they have to. They think they're supposed to ask the question. How much are you going to charge me, right? And it's like, and so let's talk about that. I want to talk about some objections. And if you've got some, please put them in the Q&A field. Okay, so they don't know what else to do. The seller just doesn't know. I went on an appointment. I took 2 of my students from Miracosta College, and I went on the appointment. They showed me around the house. We spent 2.5 hours there. They signed everything, including the listing agreement. And so, we're all standing in the kitchen. Nobody offered anybody to sit down. I had two of my girls from the class there, and so I said, well, that's pretty much about it. And I made the mistake of saying, do you have any questions for me? And they said, the missus, she looks at the husband, she turns to me and she says, can we talk about your commissions? And I said, certainly, I refuse to charge you more than I charge anybody else. And so she goes, okay. And so I grabbed my papers and I left, realizing I should not have asked the question, do you have any questions for me? And so we left the room. Thank you very much. We get outside and the 2 gals turn to me and they say, what just happened in there? And I said, well, she asked me a commission question. I answered a commission question. I'm not going to charge you any more than I charge anybody else. I refuse to charge you more than I charge anybody else is the way that I put it. And so really, she really didn't have, her question was just a question. And you got to realize that sometimes people are just asking you a question. Okay. And because they think they have to, that's all, right? Okay. Most times it really is just a question. Okay. excuse me, nothing more. So present your value proposition, okay? And your value proposition is distinguishing yourself from the rest of the pack. So let's talk about that. Present your top 10 things I'm going to do for you. In your listing agreement, there's a whole paragraph on brokers' obligations. I think you should sit down and I was in the habit of having my attorneys do this in my law class, where they would literally sit down and I made them write out the paragraph in the buyer representation agreement. These are the things I'm going to do for you. And so in the listing agreement, you have a corresponding paragraph for that. You're gonna have, I would write those all out, put them in a column, right? So, sentence number 1, sentence number 2, sentence number 3. I wouldn't number them. I'd put bullet points in front of them. So when I was first into the real estate business back many decades ago, I was with a company and I had the top 21 things we're going to do for you. So guess what that company was, right? And so I had typed them all out. They came out of a listing agreement. I typed them all out. I had a company called Alpha Graphics. I don't even know if they're in business anymore, but I would send it down to Alpha Graphics. I had them printed on canary paper that made it look like the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? So something really, really official. And so I would always come in with that. Okay, so here's my top 10 things I'm going to do for you. This was top 21 things I'm going to do for you. It's the hokiest stuff you ever saw, right? But it was right out of the listing agreement, okay, or right out of the buyer representation agreement when I was representing a buyer. And so I would sit down with them right in front of them and I would sign it and I would hand it to them. Boy, you can put on a show, right? And they would look at that, they would go, wow, this is really cool, right? Well, I just introduced them to what I'm going to do for you as the broker in this transaction, and then they're going to sign it in the listing agreement. So again, that I signed in front of them, and I'm going to talk to you about the order of forms that I'm going to sign in. And that was the first one, the top 10 things I'm going to do for you, okay? Take notes from your listing agreement. So again, as I said, go through your listing agreement. You've got one paragraph devoted to brokers' obligations, and that's what I would write out. I would put them in stack, and I would sign that in front of them. You don't even need to have them sign it in front of them because you're going to start signing things, and I'm going to show you my strategy on that. So prepare for the objections. So-and-so will charge me less. I love that, right? Why? My response is always, and they probably should. And this just really throws them off, right? Why? Because they're looking for you to agree to charge less, right? You'll match what they charge. No, I'm not. I'm worth more. Right? You need to understand your value. So when they say something like that, you need to be breathing a sigh of relief because they just told you what their strategy is. So-and-so will charge me less. And I respond, they probably should. And then they're looking at me like, what do you mean by that? And I say, well, they have to compete with me based on my price, on my commission. So they have to charge less because they can't compete with me on my service. Right? My service is much better. I'm going to get you more money for your property than anybody else is going to get you because I'm actually spending the time with you to go over all this. And likewise, I'm going to spend the time with the offer that comes in, and we'll go through all the offers. We'll sit down and go through all these things. So you need to separate yourself from those agents that are willing to charge less money to do. They're clearly not going to do the same job you're going to do. And if you're not confident about, what you're going to do, again, look at the listing agreement, read the paragraph of your obligations. You're going to be surprised how de minimis it is. Okay. And then look at the seller's obligations. Have those in your head because you're going to be talking about this. They're going to ask you the question and they're going to say, because there's always somebody that'll charge you less. So Wayne Bell, who was the previous real estate commissioner, was a friend of mine. I like Wayne. And I remember talking to him on the phone one day, and I think he saw my signature line. And on my signature line, I quote John Ruskin. And so if you want a copy of it, send me an email. I'll send you my signature line. But I quoted John Ruskin. And John Ruskin, to paraphrase, there's always somebody willing to do, what you do for less, make an inferior product, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I always think I should pull that up. In fact, I'll probably add it for the next presentation. But anyway, and he said to me on the phone, he said, I've got that on the wall behind my desk. And I go, wow. So some of these, this is the commissioner of real estate, right? And so some of these things in your signature lines are very, very powerful. And people that read can read them and they understand. That's why my signature line is like, a big document. Okay. So it's all about me kind of thing. Okay. So, but remember, they can't compete with me based on my service because I'm just going to provide superior service. Now, who's ever going to know the difference, right? First of all, I know I'm going to provide a better service, but that doesn't matter. It's okay. People do business with you because they like you. But when we have the objection of, how much you're going to charge me, so and so is going to charge me less, you need to be able to shirk that and get back down to the issue at hand, and that is they probably should charge you less because they just can't compete with me. Okay, and have that in your head. Make that something you own, because this is going to be probably one of the most common objections they're going to give you. Okay, all right. So remember the old saying, and I always love this. Remember the old saying, you get what you, and I always stop there, right? And why? Because I want them to complete it. I want them to complete the sentence. Okay, so you get what you pay for it, right? Okay, I have them complete it, because if they complete it, then let them complete it. Again, they will own it. So if they complete it, then they will own it, and then they will understand, oh, I get it. You get what you pay for. So-and-so is going to do it for less money. They probably should. Okay, I get that. All right, everybody good? Okay. Questions about any of that? I want to make sure we're handling it. Okay, this is good stuff. Okay, all right. I hear that the market is at X. In other words, they're saying that I hear that commissions are at X. And so I always say to them, my response, how do you know that? Right? I just ask the question, how do you know that? Right? Do you know that it's a violation of our MLS rules to share agent printouts with non-subscribers? Okay, so why do I say that? Because what they're being shown by other agents. They're being shown the MLS listings that show the commission to the buyer's agent. Okay, the CBB, right? The commission to the buyer's broker. Okay, so that's a violation, because the commissions are not an issue for the seller. Right, the commissions, this is a negotiable item between me and the seller, but somebody else is showing them what the commissions are being paid to the buyer's broker. We have a transaction right now, it's 1%. We had a transaction just recently, $500. We get around all that, right? Because we always have a buyer representation agreement with our buyer. But as I've been doing many talks on this is where our industry is heading. The seller's agent will keep their commission. The buyer's agent will get their commission from the buyer. This is the way it's done in commercial all the time. Okay, so if you don't believe me, you got some surprises coming, because I was in a very high CAR level meeting last week where we were introducing legislation that required a buyer representation agreement with the buyer. And by the way, it is the law in many states. In Virginia, where I also have a broker's license, they made it a law July 1st of last year that if you don't have a buyer representation agreement with someone, then you are giving legal advice, and you may not be compensated for that legal advice. Okay, so in other states where I practice, they say, okay, when do we sign the buyer representation agreement? So get good at that, folks. You need to be aware. So, but what those other agents are telling the seller is, here's the amount of money being paid to the buyer's agent, and then the seller automatically thinks that that is half of the total commission, right? I had a conversation with one of Linda's agents today, that they said, didn't we always split the commissions evenly? There's no rule. There's nothing in the MLS, nothing. That's an antitrust violation to even suggest it. But I always say, if they're going to break the rules now, I mean, they could have provided a client handout, but the impact they were trying to make was they were trying to earn their commission by showing how much the buyer's agent was getting, and then the seller would double it and figure that's how much the total commission should be. Listen, we just closed a transaction where we were being paid 2%, and then it turned out, we did the seller's payment to buyer's broker form in the new contract, and the seller agreed to pay us 3%. We found out during, in the settlement sheet at the end, that the total listing commission had been 7%. They were going to pay us 2%, and they were going to keep 6 or 5 rather, 5, because the total commission was 7%. So there's no rule that says we have to split it. Okay, and so we were happy getting our 3, but I know people that are taking 10% listings. So be aware, it's coming to a theater near you where you need to protect yourself. I had a broker call me on the phone. They're paying $100 commission. Yeah, that's illegal. Illegal? Well, first of all, you don't ask me because I can't give you legal advice, right? And you're a broker, so they can pay you whatever they want to pay you. They have to tell the seller how much they're paying you, right? But I think we found out a little bit later that they actually didn't have an agreement with the seller, and so it was in the MLS. So a lot of bad things happened to that poor agent. But they lied. But anyway, at the end of the day, they can pay you whatever they want to pay you. They just have to tell a seller. That's what paragraph 3D is in the listing agreement. It says how much you're going to pay the buyer's agent. Okay, so but I always say, all right, well, if they're going to break the rules now by showing you the agent printout, and I don't need to say anything else. If they're going to break the rules now, what makes you think they're not going to break the rules later and maybe even throw you under the bus, right? So nothing replaces boots on the ground in the realtor community. I always like to kind of throw that in, and so. Your response again, you're only seeing what the seller's agent is paying the buyer's agent, and that is rarely half. Okay, so again, it's deceptive. You should not be showing them the full agent printout anyway. It's a violation of your agreement, your contract with the MLS. And then I'm gonna pin on that when I'm having my conversation with the seller. I'm gonna bring that up, and you need to think about that. Okay, so here they were trying to earn their money supposedly by comparing what other people are paying, when in fact that's not the case. And so I'm seeing more and more of this. We're the ones signing off on commission disbursements, and so be very well aware of that. So there's no requirement that seller's agent split the commission equally with the buyer's agent. There's no rule, there's no law, there's no assumption at law, there's no MLS standard. There is none. There is no such thing. Okay. All right. So-and-so has a lot of listings. I always love that. Okay, so I'm up against the heavy hitter. I had agents that carried 65, 75 listings at a time, right? They were just a machine. They would go out on a listing appointment. They're coming back out with the listing. Okay, so this seller has talked with them on the phone. They're coming out at 4 o'clock. I'm going to be there at 3 o'clock. So-and-so has a lot of listings. My response to that is always, I promised you personal service. Okay. Would you rather work with the real estate professional that you hired, or maybe get calls on Monday from an assistant making excuses for why your house hasn't sold? Again, house. Okay, not home. All right. And so, and the heavy hitters, they don't have time to sit on Monday morning, start to call all the sellers and explain to them, how come their house hasn't sold. They pay people to do that, right? So and the people that specifically do that, we had a guy doing 822 transactions a year. He had 7 full-time assistants. This guy was a machine, right? He has 7 full-time assistants, everybody with a job to do. He had a transaction coordinator assistant. He had a listing assistant. He had a buyer side assistant. He had 1 half-time buyer's agents because he focused only on taking listings. Does this make sense? Okay, so do you want to get the call? Do you want to talk to me? I only carry a couple listings at a time. I'm not interested in owning the world. Or do you want to talk about those machines that are out there that are doing 65, 75 listings at a time, and then you'll never hear from the agent again? Most of the complaints I get from sellers is I never heard from the agent after I gave them a listing. And of course, the first thing I'm thinking about is how much you're paying them, right? Or did you get them to reduce their commission? Are they angry with you? That kind of thing. So know your scripts again. When we're dealing with the seller, we refer to the structure as a house. This helps desensitize them from the sale. When we're dealing with the buyer, we're looking for a home, right? So you need to keep your terminology in there, right? So the seller, it's a house. I want to desensitize that from them. I want them to be able to sell the house, but I want the buyer to be able to buy the home. Okay. All right. So again, that sensitizes them for the purchase. So what are the most important things, and I ask this of the seller, that you are looking for in a real estate professional? All right. And this is important, folks. I'm going through my presentation here. Were you aware that not all real estate agents are realtors? They're surprised to hear that, right? And so I explained to them, I say, well, we have 435,000 real estate agents, real estate licenses in the state of California, but less than 200, less than half of those are actually a realtor. And so again, remember my first big closing item, I've got the listing input sheet. My second big closing item was my top 10 things I'm going to do for you. Now here's my third big closing item. By the time I get done with this, it's over, okay? Let's look at a standard form that realtors use in our industry to explain the differences. So now I'm telling the seller that there's a standard form, and there is a standard form. Maybe you didn't know about that, but this is like one of my best closers right here. So let's take a look at a standard form that realtors use to explain the differences between the two. So let's take a look. I want to get over here. I want to pull up my realtor acknowledgement form. This is the CAR form RA. Page 1 says it is for realtor use only. Use of this form by non-realtors in violation of California B&P Code section 10177. Penalties may result in the violator's real estate license being suspended or revoked or denied issuance for new applicants. And I tell the seller, I say, if you call yourself a realtor and you're not, you're just a licensee, or you lead them to believe that you're a realtor when you aren't, you can't even get a job as a janitor in a building that has a real estate office in it. That's how powerful this is. This is Business and Professions Code, B&P Code 10177, okay? And this is page 1. And so all those things that we talk about, they go, wow, nobody ever told me that. And then I show them the form. This is page 2. And notice we haven't even revised it since July of 06. Right? So this is do you know? So now here's what I've done. I didn't say that the other people weren't realtors. I just said that, you know, how do you know that they're a realtor? And so then I led them to believe, of course, that we have a form that we use to explain that. It's kind of like, again, reading you your rights rather than quoting you your rights. And then they look at this and they go, wow, this is really something. You know, nobody's ever shown me this form before. And notice that only you sign it, okay? So only you sign the form. And this is going to be that remember, I have the listing input sheet, then I have the top 10 things I'm going to do for you, which I sign and give it to them. And then later on in the presentation, I'm going to sign this form because I'm going to put my neck out that says I am a realtor and I'm proud of it. And so I want you to know that, okay? So let's take a look at that form to explain the difference. And that's going to be my RA form, the realtor acknowledgement form. You can see that it is a crime to call yourself a realtor when you are not. And now what's the seller thinking? God, I thought all, you know, it's like tissue and Kleenex, right? Well, no, it's not. All of a sudden they realize less than half of these people, but then I don't know which ones. Right. And so I've told them, you know, they say to me, I've never seen that form before. And I said, and then they say, no one has ever shown it to me. Now, listen to how this goes. No one has ever shown it to me. And then I respond, I know not everyone wants you to know that there's a difference. So in other words, I've laid the foundation for the fact that we all bring in the RA form when we're taking a listing. Okay, does that make sense? Between having a license and abiding by a written code of ethics. I'm not saying that the other agents are not ethical. Okay, which ones we don't know, which ones are realtors, less than half of them. So I don't know, maybe they're running numbers thinking I've had 2 other people in here, so one of them is not a realtor. I don't know what they're doing with that, okay? But there is a difference. I subscribe to a written code of ethics. They do not. I did not say that they weren't ethical. Right? I mean, I'm never going to say that. I'm never going to make a disparaging remark about somebody else. My daddy always said, you never make yourself better by making somebody else feel worse, right? But there is a difference. I subscribe to a written code of ethics. I'm held accountable for it, right? I can be brought up on charges for being unethical. Now I'm a DRE approved instructor on ethics. And so, you know, I don't know if that means anything. And I'm probably going to throw that in there too. You don't have to be that person, but you could finish it with, you know, that there's a difference. Okay. And that's the important part of this. Sign it in front of them. Give them a copy. Don't sign it ahead of time. Sign it in front of them and then hand it to them. Why? Because only you signed it. They don't. See, look, no blood. I love it. Talk about it's a charade, right? So think about it, Scott, for a second. So see, look, no blood, right? And that's, we're going to be signing things here today and nobody's going to get hurt, right? So I love saying that. And I smile and they go, oh, God, that's funny. Ah, ha, ha. Good. And then now they're getting ready to sign things. Okay. All right. So, and again, this is being taped. It's going to be up on the internet. So I'm hoping all the sellers don't necessarily see this, but fine. And then the next form I'm going to bring in front of them is going to be my agency disclosure form. Okay, so and I tell them this. I say California law requires, in bold print, requires, and you can say Civil Code, Cal Civil Code 2079, that I disclose the concept of agency before we do anything else. And that's very true. 2079.13 actually says you must disclose the concept of agency prior to committing conduct that constitutes agency. So let's pull that one up. Obviously, I got a lot of stuff to show you, but here's my agency disclosure form. So you can see by looking at it, make sure you're using the 1221 version. There was a 1018 version. That was when we made the first major modification to the legislative, to the act. This is civil code, okay? So here it is, 2079.13. I just said that a second ago, all right? So I go over this form with them and I show them, I say, here's what it means for me to represent you. Here's what it means to represent, if the buyer's agent's going to represent them, okay? And by the way, these are two terms that we changed in October of 2018 because we were calling them the listing agent and the selling agent. Nobody knew who was who, right? And so now we've made it so that we've done it in plain English, the seller's agent and the buyer's agent. And by the way, I know we have a number of TCs on this call, so it's no longer, now when you say SA avid, that means the seller's agent's avid, whereas before it used to mean the selling agent. We don't do that anymore. Now we call them for who they are. So the SA avid for the seller, the BA avid for the buyer. Okay. All right. Good. Everybody's good. What happens when we have dual agency? One of my favorite things. I get very nervous with dual agency. I'm not very comfortable with it. From the legal field, when I'm talking to attorneys, they're like, "How do you get away with dual agency?" I have a hard time with it. We have attorneys in our office that work in our office as agents, as brokers, and they won't do dual agency. They just won't do it, right? So if they're the seller's agent, then I'm probably going to end up being the buyer's agent. It's still dual agency, but they want to distance themselves from the buyer. They don't want to have that communication back with the buyer, even though technically speaking, it belongs to Linda, it belongs to the broker, but they just have a real hard time with that. And I can tell you, I speak with attorneys every single day. They call me every day asking for advice about stuff. I got this case, this is doing this is doing that. And every time we bring up a dual agency, I just go, I know what you're going to say. So they're just not comfortable with it. Okay. So, and then here's my sellers and buyers responsibilities, et cetera, et cetera. If you really want to understand the concept of agency, then you go to page 2. And when I get to page 2, I've got, civil code section, read it one time. Can you do that for me? Just read it once. Okay. It's fascinating. I was asked to proof this about 25 years ago. I found one mistake down here where it says agents that have been spelled agnets. But I was checking also for grammar, making sure it was consistent with the civil code, et cetera, et cetera. Today we have machines that'll do all that. But I think if you really want to understand the concept of agency, and again, I say that purposefully, the concept of agency, because then when we get the purchase offer coming in, now we're going to confirm agency. So we must disclose the concept. And I'm familiar with a case where the Department of Real Estate took a $66,000 commission away from a brokerage firm. The transaction coordinator discovered that agency hadn't been signed, had it signed the day before closing, but the Department of Real Estate said that's too late. That needed to happen before they wrote the offer, needed to happen before they took the listing, right? Before you start doing anything that constitutes agency. So they said it was just too late. I don't want to be that case, and my hat is off to the TC that caught it. Unfortunately, somebody else should have caught it earlier in the transaction, like the agents. And I do see agents printing these things and separating the documents. I wouldn't do that, but that's just kind of how all that's going to go. Everybody good with that? I wanted to make sure I brought that up. My agency disclosure issue. Good, you can see it. Any questions about that? Seeing none. A couple other things I want to show you. I've got a really good printout here. 7 reasons to work with a realtor. And this is from, I'm pretty sure this is from NAR. Notice the use of the realtor with the R. It should be a superscript, not subscript, but you know, this is the breakdown of one of the reasons why we do all this. See, wouldn't that be a nice thing? I will give you copies of everything I've done. Okay, so literally, you know me, work product, forget it. I'll give you everything. Send me an email. Don't put your email in the line here because I'm going to lose everything. But you know, 7 reasons to work with a realtor. How about when choosing a realtor? What are the questions to ask? What should you be asking the realtor? Okay, so I give these to the seller because I qualify for all these things. How about the seller's guide to the listing agreement? And we're going to get to that in just a second because I want to let's go back to the PowerPoint and cover that. So again, when I talk to the seller, I say this is not a contract. This is merely a disclosure. All right, because they're going to balk you. They're going to go, wait a minute, you know, this is the first thing you ever have them sign, right? So I'm not going to sign anything. I'm not ready. That also tells you where they are in the process. You know, you haven't built rapport yet. So that's when I tell them this isn't a contract, but the law requires, remember this, folks, right here, the law requires that I disclose the concept of agency before we do anything else. Is everybody good with that? This again becomes one of my best closers, all right? But it also tells me that, you know, where they are, you know, do we love each other or not? That kind of thing. We're going to do a lot of these today, okay? And that's how I set them up for that. So here's my, you know, here's my list of how I handle it. I mean, again, every transaction is different. Sometimes you have a trust and things like that. So I always say, do your warnings first. Now, I'm not going to bring up, do I? No. I have all of these forms here. I want you to see these. There you go. Okay. So I have all these forms for you already ready to go. These are all the things, lots of stuff, how to prepare for your move, how to add curb appeal, you know, stuff like that. So I wanted to show you that, but I want to do my warnings first. And so, you know, quickly we'll go through this. Your cyber crimes advisory, I would absolutely make sure you're doing this in every transaction that you do. You need to contact your E&O carrier. If you're the broker, you need to contact your E&O carrier and make sure you have coverage for cybercrime. Check what the coverage does. You know, it may not be worth it. A lot of companies are now trying to distance themselves from this. I have a case currently where $1 million went to the wrong people, and there's just lawyers everywhere. I had one a couple of years ago. Money got transferred to HFC in Hong Kong, and by the time they reported it, you know, HFC said, you know, we're not going to give you back the money; it's gone, it took them too long to get to it. If you can get to it within 24 hours, you have a chance of recovering it. But you know, most people are too embarrassed to admit it until way too late. So your cyber crimes advisory, very important. My wire fraud advisory, very important. Again, I'm going to take this opportunity because in the CAR meeting, the high level meeting last week, we discussed the fact that you should be using your company's email. So if your company name is Horizons Realty, then you should have your name at horizonrealty.com, right? So you need to use your company's email. It's much less likely. Hopefully your company has a protected server. I've got I'm representing a group in Virginia that has 6,500 agents, and nobody has company email addresses except the top 4. So, all right, I think you should have company email addresses for everybody. Our office does, but your E&O carrier, watch out. If you're using free email, whatever that is, your E&O carrier, check with your policy and make sure you've got coverage. Because you may not have coverage. So wire fraud advisory is hot, hot, hot. We're going to have our NAR meeting again in Anaheim in November. The FBI will be coming in. They will do, and I have so many presentations from the FBI on cyber fraud. And again, send me an email, be specific, I'll send it to you. Local area disclosures in San Diego, very, very important. We want to make sure that we make those disclosures. It is pages and pages long. So you want to make sure you're making those disclosures about, and they break it down into different sections, right? North County Coastal, North County Inland, Coronado, South Bay, they break it down into separate sections. Statewide buyer and seller advisory. I love the form. It was our first attempt at the grid, prior to putting it into the RPA, which, everybody was, oh my God, what's going to happen? The agents are going to start reading it after page 3. And it's like, I hope not, because there's a lot of really important stuff in the RPA. But again, statewide buyer and seller advisory. So I'm having the seller sign all these forms. Do you understand what I'm saying? I've got a stack. I'm having them sign. Now, by the way, I might, if I'm doing it on if they're standing across the room from me and I'm sending it to them from my laptop, I'm going to still send all these forms to them, and maybe we have it done with electronic signature. Okay. So I'm going to do my market conditions advisory. I'm going to do my water conserving plumbing fixtures, my environmental hazards disclosures. The law requires those, right? The fair housing and discrimination advisory. I'm going to have my disclosures, my TDS, my SPQ, my SPQA. I'm going to already have ordered the NHD, because remember, we don't have the form in the library anymore, but I'm going to order, I order the NHD. I don't get charged for it unless we actually use that in the policy, right? So in the transaction. So I'm going to have the NHD. I'm going to have all the disclosures ready for the seller to complete. I'm going to present them all one at a time. So my disclosures, my statutory disclosures first, my CAR form TDS, right? My natural hazard disclosure. I know I mentioned this already. My fire hardening and defensible space advisory disclosure and addendum. My Mello-Roos will be included in my natural hazard disclosure. My methamphetamine contamination notice. And then I have my contractual disclosures. And again, my SPQ, which is the statewide form. It is not an optional form in the RPA. We argued about that for a long period of time. We decided we wanted to keep it in there. I'm telling you the order in which I present things. The seller's affidavit of non-foreign status. I'm going to have the seller complete that at that time. Foreign Investment and Real Property Tax Act. I'll have my seller's listing information checklist. It's an SDAR form. I think it's a great form. It asks them a series of questions that unpeels the onion as to what this listing is really going to look like. I've got my SPQA, my seller property questionnaire addendum, again, a contractual form. I ask for it in every transaction. I have a transaction right now where the seller's agent said that the seller wasn't going to complete it. So I'm going to ask for it repeatedly in the transaction. I'm going to get numerous, objections to it. Those are all going to go in my file. Okay, because I want to be able, I'm going to have the buyer sign a blank form, because I want to be able to defend myself from my buyer who says, why didn't you get these disclosures from the seller? And I want to be able to document the fact that the seller is refusing to give them, seller's refusing through their agent to give them to us. Okay. And then finally, my RLA, the very last form I'm going to have the client sign. All right, so let's take a look. So I already have my seller's guide to the residential listing agreement and the disclosures, right? So my TDS and my ESD. I'm actually writing a letter to the Department of Real Estate on the, I've had a couple of transactions where the seller claimed that they were TDS exempt. And so again, the decision as to whether or not the seller is TDS exempt is a legal decision. And so I'm going to keep asking for it. They keep on telling me no. And so, I'm going to have that in my file, but I'm writing a letter to the Department of Real Estate because I know that they're going to want me to do a talk on this. So this doesn't really do much, unfortunately, talking about what the ESD does, but that's what that's all about. And then I have my consumer's guide to disclosure requirements for my seller. Again, I'm going to have, give this to the seller to read. I might email this to them in advance, but it's a pretty good form. But then I get to my listing agreement. And again, I have my agency disclosures, the first form. Then I have my fair housing and discrimination advisory. Then I have my PRBS. Now, remember, your PRBS form is the form that authorizes that gets consent from the seller to represent other competing sellers in the area, but also for the buyer to represent competing buyers. So this is your your authorization to be a dual agent. This is your PRBS form, allows you to be a dual agent, multiple buyers, multiple sellers, dual agencies. Does everybody understand this is important? Okay, you want to absolutely have the seller sign this form. Check with your broker, of course. And then I get into my wire fraud and electronic funds transfer advisory, my WFA form, one of my favorite forms. And then I get in my listing agreement. And so my listing agreement, and I've made this one fairly generic. I had to put in the company name in order for it to allow me to save it as a PDF. But you all see how important that this is going to be. Okay, so I think we're going to probably get out of here a couple minutes early. But the last form that I'm going to have the seller sign is going to be the listing agreement, right? Why? Because it contains the price, which is how much are they going to sell for. I do a whole class on this, and in fact, I've got one waiting for DRE approval. My RPA has already been approved by the Department of Real Estate for 5 hours of continuing education. My BRBC is up there for 2 hours of continuing education, and my RLA is there for 2 hours of continuing education as well. I'm hoping to be able to start doing presentations on this pretty quickly. So again, listing price, how much are you going to get me? And then down here, how much are you going to charge me to get there? So, these are the two questions that they have. By the time I get to this, I frankly think they're exhausted. So, that's kind of an important concept, right? I've gone over everything with them, but I've earned my value. So when I've gone over all of the objections, I've gone over all of the forms, I've taken the time to disclose to them all these things. At this point, have I filled in the price? I'll probably not. I'll probably fill in the price while I'm talking with them, because I don't want to assume anything. I've had sellers. I had a seller tell me that I was high, not high like clinically high, but I had a property. It was on Calumet in San Diego, where the property comped for $279. This is a house, by the way. The seller says, "We think you're high. We want $179." I mean, that's probably the only time in my career I've had a seller tell me that I was overpriced. So sure enough, we put it on the market for $179. We had 36 offers in 24 hours. I countered every single offer. Now, some of them were like $450 and $500, but they were flipper investors, that I didn't think were very likely to close. And I went over all these facts with the seller of the property, but ultimately the seller had it on the market, and we ultimately did close for $279, which was what I said it was worth. I'm pretty good at coming up with valuation. We didn't even have tools like RPR and stuff like that at the time, but I came up with what I thought the property was worth. I'm not going to argue with the seller unless the seller comes up with a higher figure, which is more likely, where I'm going to have the conversation with the seller that, again, what I said earlier, if you overprice your property, then it sits on the market, you wait for the market to come to you. Again, I have all that in place, but I really want the listing under my terms. If they're going to be completely ridiculous about it, I may turn down the listing. I may walk out of the room, and I'll tell them at that time, I'll say, you know what, I told you that before that I was going to be honest with you. I'd rather be the second agent in. And then they ask me, they say, well, what does that mean, the second agent in? Well, the second agent is the one that is really going to sell your property. The first agent, maybe they do the freezing out thing. They price it way more than it's worth. So you have to guarantee me this, that you have to promise me that the minute that they start working the price reduction, you call me, you cancel the listing, you call me, because they don't have a listing yet, right? So I'm not interfering with the contract, but you cancel the listing with them, and you let me sell the house, because I was the one who was honest with you at the time of this appointment of how much your property was going to be worth. They told you they could get more money, and then they couldn't get it, and now they're just working the reduction. Does everybody understand? Again, I'm not making a disparaging remark about another brokerage. I'm just telling them, what happens in our industry, unfortunately. So, and so that's going to be my pricing strategy for my listing price and terms. Make sure you fill this agreement out completely, folks. I've got some issues with property management agreements right now with companies that I coach on property management, and they have, we missed a couple of boxes here and there, and so now there's a fight. So make sure you're completing stuff. If you don't have something to say, put in NA. Compensation to the broker. Again, if you don't put in compensation, you're doing it for free, right? I've gone in and reviewed brokers' files for prior to DRE appearing, and I see like no beginning and ending date on the listing agreement. And so I asked them, what's that all about? And they say, well, we wanted to be able to adjust it as we went along. Well, that's going to be that's a DRE violation. You probably lose your broker's license for that. You need to have a beginning and an ending date, not something that you make up. Clearly not something you're going to change over a seller's signature. That would be fraud. And when the DRE says fraud, you need to listen to that, okay? And then commissions, fill in, how much you're going to charge me to get there, be proud, get what you think you're worth. Again, I've seen brokers take listings recently for 10%. I've seen other brokers take them for 1%. It's really up to you. Check with your broker. Your broker's required by law to establish a minimum commission within your office. And that number you do not discuss that with other brokerage firms. We're not going to do any price fixing. We're not going to call anything customary, normal. Everybody charges it. Nobody will show your property without it. You don't want to it's a Sherman antitrust violation. We're fortunate we actually have an antitrust attorney who works in our office as an agent. Wonderful gal, very bright. I was communicating with her already today about some stuff, and so don't get yourself in that pickle. Those commissions are negotiable between the seller and the broker. I always say, well, they may be negotiable. And so the seller says, well, will you negotiate? Well, sure. How much do you want to pay? And they give me a figure that's less than what I charge normally. And I say, no, negotiable, up. So usually I shut them up right away. They won't say anything after that because they don't want to have to pay more. And so, I have fun on the appointment, and I hope you are too. So that listing agreement, that's the last thing that I'm putting in front of them. The last form the client will sign. Why? Because it contains everything they want to talk about. Pricing discussion's already done. I talk about a 30, 60, 90-day price. I say to the seller, I say, well, how long do you need? How long, do I have to sell the property? And well, we're not in a hurry. And I had one of those. I literally listed, last name was Johnson, so I'll tell you their last name. I won't tell you the first names, but across the street from my house, this is back in the early 80s, and they said, we're not in a hurry. And by the way, the value of the property was $96,000. This is a house, right? Boy, today it's probably $1.5 million, but anyway, it was a house worth $96,000. Seller says, I want $99,000. I said, it's not going to sell for that. And so, but they insisted. They said, don't worry about it. We're not in a hurry. If I tell you, every single day they called me on the phone. We didn't have internet. The public didn't have internet. They called me every single. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have fax machines. Seller called me every day, and I'm living across the street. Why haven't you sold my house yet? How come you haven't even shown my house yet? How come nobody from your office has shown my house yet? And it was to a point where, my house was down towards, it was on a slope, and I used to drive home at night, turn the headlights off, and then coast into the garage door opener. We didn't have those. I'd taken the bulb out so the seller couldn't see that I'd gotten home. So literally I would coast down the street with my lights off back when you could do that. Today, I know the car locks up, but coasting all the way down up over I timed it perfectly to get into the garage, close the door behind me. Seller didn't know I was home, right? But they called me every single day. So do you want that listing? I mean, that's just a pain in the neck, right? So, but 30-day, 60-day, 90-day price. I had an attorney that sent me a listing. He says, we need to sell this house. I said, how fast? He says, 10 days. I said, okay, here's the 10-day price. That was another one. It was up on Kilkenny in Cardiff, actually. We sold that house like within 36 hours. It was amazing. You had people, in my office, big brokers in my office wanting that house. But anyway, bottom line was, I told them, you want a 10-day price, here's the 10-day price. We sold it for far over asking. Commission discussion's already done. Sell your services, not your price. This is where you should be discussing time. How quickly do you need to sell? Again, 30, 60, 90-day price, right? And I have to get to the grandkids in Idaho. How soon do you want to be with the grandkids in Idaho? I don't say, well, we want to sell fast. You say, how soon do you want to be with the grandkids? Well, we'd like to be there by Friday. Okay, well then give them the Friday price. You follow me? So what's your reason? What's your motivation for selling? What attracted you to purchase this house in the first place? By the way, I'm working on my marketing plan, right? Because when I go to sell the property, all right, I may be using the stuff. I want them to give me a list of upgrades. Do you have any favorite pictures? Things like that. Give me this stuff because I'm going to use this in my listing. Okay. Who did the upgrades, right? Do you have receipts for any of that stuff? You want to keep all that stuff, right? So we have a seller statement of repairs that SDAR provides that does a really good job of saying, I'm the seller, I did the work myself, here are the receipts for that, or I had the work done by somebody else, here's the receipts for that. So you always want to, quote the upgrade, right, or quote the repair. I had an agent ask me the other day, well, should I disclose the repair? Oh, absolutely, you disclose the repair, right? They can't sue you for what you told them. Pete Selecki said that, our attorney at SDAR. So you tell them, I had this done. Here's the receipts. They can't sue you. You told them, right? Okay. Don't hide stuff. It's not worth it. Work the referral. Where are you moving to? I had an agent in my office in Tucson who never wrote a contract. All she did was referrals. She would call for sale by owners in the paper every Sunday. And, I don't want you listing. Where are you moving to? I'm going to have people. This is back in the 80s. And so, she made a fortune off of referrals. Last referral check I cut, by the way, was $5,500. So, today it's a lot more than what it was back then. But, where are you moving to? I may know someone there who can help. Unpeel the onion, find out what it is. What are their motivations? What is causing them to move? Ask a lot of questions. Remember, listen twice as much, talk half as much, okay? Talk less, listen more. Very, very important. Write everything down. It makes you feel good. It makes them feel good. And you've documented your file, which is really, really important. And yeah, write it down in front of them. You got your listing input sheet. Write on the listing input sheet. You know what I mean? It's 8 pages. You could be busy, okay? It's okay to write everything down. It makes them feel better that you're paying attention. They're talking about the love of their life, the largest single investment of a lifetime. Very, very important to them. Brag about your brand. Whatever your brand is, brag about it. Be proud to be where you are. Coordinate your strategy. Don't be a secret agent. All right. So again, real estate is a full contact sport. You need to tell everybody what you do, and you just start lining up these appointments, right? Don't worry about your, oh, so-and-so is going on a listing appointment. Don't worry about that. I've seen people in listing appointments that give it to the what they think of as the underling or the underdog, just so the big guy wouldn't get it. So don't assume anything. Go on the listing appointment. Okay? So I'm here to help. Now's a great time. If you have any additional questions while the dog is barking, if you have any additional questions, please let me know in the Q&A field. No. Okay. All right. Okay. So again, thank you for joining us for our presentation. If you want to, I load all these up onto the YouTube website. If you've got a QR code reader ready, here you go. Here's the QR code. Thank you, Jessica, again, and thank you for being here. That's twice today. I'm honored by that. Thank you. Obviously, hopefully I provided enough value. I think I did everything you asked me to do in the email that you sent me. But again, happy to help in any way that I can. So here's our QR code. If you want to, if you type in @Burke Real Estate Consultants Inc., it'll take you to the website, to the our website. I've got the information on the RPA class. I have to, by law, actually post it on the website. So more information will be coming about that later. But we have a bit.ly link, bit.ly. There's all kinds of places to get to the YouTube videos. Case is important. And please remember to like and subscribe. I don't get paid for people liking it. I don't think so. I don't know. Nobody's ever put any money in my bank. But subscribing is good for you, because if you subscribe, when I upload the newer versions of things, you'll get the notice that there's a new version. So it's good for you. And again, I want you to be successful. I want you to be incredibly successful. I don't want you to survive. I want you to thrive. Okay. education@sdar.com. If you have any classes that you would like us to do, you can send me an email, copy them. You can send them an email, copy me, whichever way you want to do it. I do have a weekly email update. Some of you are on that already. Kevin@BurkeRealEstateConsultants.com. But I don't put you on there automatically. So I want to make that clear. I don't put you on automatically. You've got to ask. Because my whole system is all opt-in. It's not anything where I just start farming email lists. So that's what I got for us today. Anybody, if you don't have any other questions, I do want to thank you for being here. I very much appreciate the value of your time. And again, thank you. You honor me by being here. So if there aren't any other questions, I'm going to let you go and exactly at 2 hours. And so thank you again. I hope this provided value for you. But remember, I'm always available, even afterward. You can always send me an email. I am happy to help you in any way that I can. So thank you, everybody. I wish you the very best. And hopefully I get to see you again on Thursday. We'll have some fun on Thursday as well. But again, thank you. Take care for now. Bye-bye.